Hey everybody, just a quick note about the audio. I was trying to figure out how to use my new wireless mics with the SLR camera here at the CBP studio. I've tried a couple of different times now, once on a Monday show, once with Francis tonight, and I got to be honest with you, I just don't think the quality's up to snuff. So we're going to go back to the old mics. I'm going to put up some floor stands here or something so that it's easy for the guests to speak and the quality of the production remains high. One of the things I take the most pride in is the post-production and audio quality at CBP. I think a lot about how their shows I wish I could just speak to the hosts of and give them some advice on how to set up a proper home audio studio and proper sound, proper post-production stuff, everything. And I hold myself to a higher standard than that. And I just want to apologize because I really think the Francis interview is really good. I think it's good anyways, honestly, by most podcast standards, but it's not up to snuff for CBP. So we're going to go back to the old mics starting with the next episode on the feed. Just a heads up. But I appreciate your patience. One of the things about having a podcast is that you have to mess around with stuff that's a little easier for the guests and try and decide where the right line is between convenience and quality. And I think the wireless mic's just a bit too far to the side of the former. So anyway, with that, enjoy this interview with Francis Pouliot, Bull Bitcoin. Friends and enemies, welcome back, Canadian Bitcoiners podcast. I'm working on getting the timing right here when we start without doing the intro. We got to find a new intro video because I don't like that one anymore. So I'm just not doing anything at all. My name's Joey. I'm here tonight with Francis, CEO, co-founder, Bull Bitcoin, show sponsor. Bull's been up to a lot of stuff. We're going to talk about what Bull's been up to in terms of their platform, their service, and the tech that they're building out over there. We're going to talk a bit about content that they're doing. They just started shouldn't say just started. It's been going for, I think, a few months now, sort of a francophone content farm. And I don't speak French well enough, certainly not like Parisian French well enough to know exactly what's being said, but I still tune in once in a while and I try and catch it because I know the Bull guys are really doing their best over there to spread the message about Bitcoin, all sorts of different places around the world, as you guys know. We'll talk about all that. We'll get into it. First, as always, the sponsors, EasyDNS. You guys know Mark. You love Mark. Start a website, start a business. EasyDNS is the best place to do that. And don't forget, you can always count on Mark for a few things. One, your content will never be taken down. Very valuable these days, as you know. Two, your content will always be secure. Domain sure over there and a suite of security products to make sure that you guys don't have your emails spoofed, your website spoofed, to make sure that when your domain expires, it's not taken by somebody who's a nefarious actor who tries to use those email suffixes to scam your customers, scam your clients, scam your newsletter list, whatever. And of course, it is the only place that I know of in the domain world where you get a money back guarantee. Not that you'd ever use it. Mark is the best. You don't have to worry about not liking the stuff that you get, not liking the service you receive. So go over there, use our code CBP Media. You get 50% off your first round of buys. Not to mention, of course, I say this every week, the Nostr Relay, Bitcoin Node stuff, all the VPS, virtual private server options, tons of stuff going on EasyDNS. So check them out. Second sponsor, Bull Bitcoin. I should have made Francis do it now that I think about it, but it's too late. These guys are best in silo when it comes to Bitcoin exchanges. Why? A couple of reasons. One, the team. You guys know Francis well, but the team working behind the scenes is really just as great. Francis has done a great job hiring, and these guys talk with Len and I every day. And I have to say, we open chats with our sponsors to talk business and talk podcasts and talk stuff like that. But in our case, anyway, I don't know if other shows are like this. The chat has completely changed into just a bunch of guys chopping it up, which is fantastic. You don't see that a lot these days. And, those guys are some of the most base guys out there. So we like that. Number two, no shit coins. You buy Bitcoin, you sell Bitcoin, that's it. Not to mention that it's self-custody only. I actually have the latest Bull Bitcoin shirt on underneath this, but it is covered in nearly fresh baby puke. So I had to throw a sweatshirt on before we started the show. All that said, self-custody, never worry about getting rugged. Never worry about someone coming and hacking into your account, stealing your coins. Ain't going to happen, not with Bull. And then finally, the bills system. If you want to live on a Bitcoin standard, you only have one choice. I mean, you got to pay your bills somehow. A lot of places sell gift cards, okay? These guys do that too. But even more places need to be doing the bills payment system where you can buy, whether it's gift cards, pay your property tax, pay your mortgage, pay your university tuition, if you're still into that scam. Number of different ways for you to interact with, use, and I guess like Donald Trump says, in the spirit of the inauguration next week, play with your Bitcoins. So go there, use the promo code, sign up, you get $20 or $21. And I can see that you guys are signing up and using the service. That's all we want. Decentral Technologies out of Montreal is the third sponsor. Len is not here, so he's not going to pull up his BitAxe, but my BitAxe is just off to the side. You can't hear it. And the thing is running all the time, playing the lottery, join Brains, whatever you want. There's tons of pools. You want to join Brains, you want to join Ocean, you want to run lottery on CK Solo, whatever you like, these guys will help you do it. If you don't just want to do lottery mining and you want to do something a little more serious, rack some stuff in your garage, like I always say, Decentral Tech has all the stuff you need to do mining at a level where your wife will want to divorce you, and do mining at a level where your wife won't even know you're doing it. Perfect in both cases. There's no promo code. Go there, talk to the guys, talk to the team. Like I said, best around. They have what many people are calling the best board repair guy on the planet working there. So make of that what you will. I'm not 100% sure, but I wouldn't bet against them. Decentral Technologies. Francis is here. Francis coming to us today, and I thought that's got to be 4K. I mean, you just look great, man. One of the most handsome guys in Bitcoin. Never had a camera until a couple of days ago, and now look at him. He's like a new man.
I love it. I got my little podcasting set up, so it's been great. Yeah, I've been using very, very shitty technology over the past years for podcasting.
It looks good, man. It looks good. We have a lot to talk about. I reached out to you a couple of weeks back, and you've been outspoken on a number of topics over the years. Among them, cultural stuff, Bitcoin stuff, economic stuff, political stuff. And I thought, man, what better guy to talk to these days with all the moving parts than you? But I want to first, maybe before we get into the weeds a little bit, you guys have just rolled out some new stuff at Bull Bitcoin. What have you been working on?
Well, we've been working on a self-custodial Bitcoin wallet for about a year and a half now. It's kind of still a little bit beta. We're not really promoting it super hard because we're working on some pretty advanced features, but we just rolled out PayJoin. So we are the first ever mobile Bitcoin wallet to allow users to receive PayJoin payments. As far as I know, we are not just the first mobile wallet, might be the first wallet in the world to allow users to receive PayJoin payments. PayJoin's a little bit, it's a hard thing to explain. But PayJoin essentially, so when Satoshi wrote the white paper, there's like a quote in the white paper where he identifies one of the privacy problems with Bitcoin, which is if you look at the blockchain, obviously everybody knows all the transactions are traceable, but there's a heuristic that you can use on the blockchain, which is that every input, every coin used in a transaction must necessarily belong to the same person, right? So let's say I receive 3 Bitcoin payments of like 0.1 Bitcoin, and I send you, Joey, 0.3 Bitcoins. When on the blockchain, you're going to see 3 coins of 0.1, and then an output of 0.3 that goes to you. And when thieves and hackers are using chain analysis tools to trace your coins, or otherwise malicious entities are trying to track you on the blockchain, they use strategies to figure out which coins belong to whom. And one of those is this rule, this heuristic, that all the coins inbound that are in the transaction, like on the input side, must belong to the same person. And PayJoin completely destroys this heuristic, right? So when you do a PayJoin transaction with someone, the receiver is actually putting some of his Bitcoin in the input side, and the way that this is done is a little bit of dark magic. The other thing on the blockchain, let's say that I send you 0.3 Bitcoins on the blockchain, we're going to see that the amount is 0.3. So you can track the amount that was sent and received on the blockchain. And that's also another heuristic that the chain analysis companies and the hackers and thieves and malicious entities are using to track you, which is they're looking at the amount and they're trying to figure reverse engineering stuff that can happen. And in a PayJoin transaction, this is so mind blowing that when I show this to people in person, even like Bitcoin experts, even though intellectually like they know that this is possible, they're like, whoa. Basically, the amount that appears on the blockchain is not the amount that was transacted. So I'm sending you 0.3 Bitcoins, and on the blockchain, it might be like 0.1162111. There's going to be a bunch of numbers there, and that 0.3 amount is not going to be there. So when you're sending and receiving a pay join payment, the amount on the blockchain is not the same amount that you actually receive. So like you gain a lot of privacy there. And another really awesome feature with that is like a lot of people are receiving small UTXOs, and I can see by your name handle there that you are above average UTXO size. And typically you're telling newbies, hey, don't forget to consolidate your UTXOs once in a while. And the way that you consolidate UTXOs is basically you send Bitcoin to yourself, right? And it's going to take all those little coins and it's going to aggregate them into one output, which you send to yourself. But it requires the user to send in order to consolidate. When you're receiving a pay join payment, you are passively, opportunistically consolidating your Bitcoin without even knowing it. So let's say that you had a bunch of little coins in your wallet and I send you money, you're actually going to be consolidating Bitcoin without even knowing it in a privacy preserving transaction. So that's super dope. So generally speaking, we have started, by the way, for people who use the Bull Bitcoin wallet, which is not a lot, like a few thousand people, it's still beta testers. We're redesigning it. It's going to look absolute fire. The design of the wallet is something that I did personally. I am not a designer, but I just wanted to ship the product. So I designed it myself with the colors and everything. And then it doesn't look amazing, but the new one is going to look absolutely fire. And we're investing heavily in the open source software. So we got like, I don't know, maybe like four to five guys that are now working full-time on the Bull Bitcoin wallet. I want the Bull Bitcoin wallets to become the ultimate sovereign individual tool. So we're actually going to have Nostr in this Bull Bitcoin wallet as well, encrypted, uncensorable, direct messages between people. We're working on something actually. We're working on a lot of like little, like unique R&D projects. One of them, I think we are going to solve the problem of creating backups for users. So like users losing their backups or having insecure passphrases. Again, another rabbit hole. But I've been focused on solving 4 problems in Bitcoin that are related to self-custody: how to buy Bitcoin securely, how to cash Bitcoin out securely, how to convert fiat to Bitcoin, Bitcoin to fiat. Whether that's in Canada, Costa Rica, or Europe, we've pretty much kind of like solved this problem quite successfully. Obviously, we are 30 something employees, no VC funding. So you can imagine like we're doing this pretty successfully. The other problem was I want to use Bitcoin for payments. I use Bitcoin. I've been using Bitcoin for payments for 9 years. I got debanked in 2015. And after getting debanked by a few banks in 2015 for doing, peer-to-peer Bitcoin trading and stuff like that, I decided like I'm going to try to live on a Bitcoin standard as much as possible. So that's why, we developed like the bills feature that you mentioned in the intro. In Costa Rica, we have this feature to spend Bitcoin payments, to spend Bitcoin and like pay people with fiat. Same thing in Europe. But I want people to be able to download an app and buy coffee with Bitcoin without custody. There's a huge kind of like shift towards custodial wallets because self-custodial Lightning is not, it's not great for like end users. It's not super scalable. So with the Bull Bitcoin wallet, we came up with this strategy, which was, also employed by Aqua Wallet. I think we both independently came up with the same idea at the same time, but to have a liquid network wallet, which is not self-custodial. It's not exactly self-custodial. That is also a huge rabbit hole. But the liquid network is not fully decentralized. It's not fully censorship resistant as Bitcoin is, but it's orders of magnitude better than the alternative, which is a custodial wallet. Whether that's an eCash Mint, I think Cashew is great. It's cool, but it's custodial. Whether that's like just a wallet of Satoshi, or whether that's like a Coinbase. This is like people are going either full custodial with like wallets of Satoshi, or they're not using Bitcoin for payments. Yeah. So I think we've definitely achieved a level where you can use Bitcoin for payments in a self-sovereign way with the Bull Bitcoin wallet. And then the fourth part, so like cheap payments was the third one that I wanted to solve. And the fourth one I want to solve is people not losing their backups, not losing their keys. So, when Bitcoin Jungle, the project that I also collaborate with in Costa Rica, was founded, the idea was like the kind of people that we're onboarding, they are sovereign in their minds, but they're not tech savvy. So we're afraid that they're going to lose their keys, right? So of course there's a custodial wallet that you recover with a phone number, that's how we prevent people from losing their money. It's like if they lose their phone, we can recover for them. But I want to solve this problem with technology which allows the users to remain fully 100% self-sovereign without like a third party holding your key, without a complicated multi-sig, without you needing to buy hardware. This is something that you should be able to download and set up within 30 seconds. You should be able to orange pilled your drunk friend at a bar at 2 a.m. You're drunk, you're sending him $200 worth of Bitcoin because he racked the credit card during the night. And the next morning, he's not going to fuck up. He doesn't have to write down his seat on a piece of paper like in the middle of the night. So that's the problems that I'm trying to solve. And we are solving them through open source software. It's the absolute joy of my life is to work on these open source sovereign individual tools. As a guy who runs a Bitcoin exchange, a lot of my life fucking sucks because I have to deal with regulators. I have to deal with banks. I have to deal with all sorts of nonsense. So to keep my sanity and to keep my soul pure, I also devote a lot of my time to like open source projects whose goals are to help people regain their sovereignty. So that's some of the stuff that I've been working on, kind of like on the wallet side and like on the like Bitcoin exchange side. Like the big news, obviously, since I met you was since we last spoke, is like Bull Bitcoin launched in Europe. That was the size of the headache that I was in terms of banking and regulation is incomprehensible to the average person. I made it out alive. Thanks to as you mentioned also earlier, like a really insanely awesome group of Bitcoiners in France. So a guy called Theo Mogenet, a guy called Géraud, awesome funny shit poster, a guy called Gilles Cadignan, and a guy called Génie Chambrad. So we launched Bull Bitcoin in Europe. Huge success so far. The other thing that we're working on generally, I always thought that Bull Bitcoin was going to be just a Canada only business because, I'm from Canada and like, I just didn't really want to complicate my life too much. But then I moved to Costa Rica and I was like, I would love Bull Bitcoin in Costa Rica for myself and for my friends. So we did Bull Bitcoin in Costa Rica. Bull Bitcoin in Costa Rica, by the way, is an enormous success. Great. Enormous. The amount of volume that we're doing here is way higher than what we expected. There's just no other good solution for Costa Ricans, whether that's people, buying their coffees or like foreigners like myself that move here and then need to like buy a car. We haven't sold a house yet for Bitcoin, but it's coming pretty soon. That's the number one thing that people are asking me. It's like, can I fuck off from Canada and move to Costa Rica and like buy a house with Bitcoin? Like these kinds of amounts are little, we're still about a year in Costa Rica. So not necessarily ready to do that, but very close. So, that kind of like opened my mind to like, all right, Bull Bitcoin is now international. That's why like, Medex and I were like, we're going to just put Bull Bitcoin International on all of our merch. We're an international company. So, all right. And then we went to Europe. So now we have like a huge market and then we're like, what's next? So we are definitely going to launch in Mexico. You heard it first on the podcast. We're launching in Mexico relatively soon. So Mexico has also been a very large bureaucratic headache. We've been working on that for over 2 years, but we finally made it happen. So Mexico's a done deal. Looking at another major country in Latin America where we're pretty close to. Mexico's done. It's just not live. Another country in South America, and then from there, who knows? We'll see.
But never the United States, right? I've heard you talk about the just logistical / regulatory nightmare in the States because of the sovereign borders, in that country, right? Is that still the case? Well,
I again, in order to protect my sanity and my personal security, I thought that the U.S. was just, it's not just like the financial regulator. It's like the CIA, the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, the National Security Agency. Department of Justice, like you got all sorts of big guns that are looking at what you're doing, and the US doesn't really fuck around that much with, financial stuff. So I thought, I don't want to ever expose myself to that. But guess what? Europe is actually worse. Europe is worse. So their European governments and regulations are very strict, very severe, very aggressive. I didn't think it was going to be that hard, to be perfectly honest with you, when we first ventured into Europe. So after dealing with Europe, I'm like, I don't think it can be that bad. And what's actually pretty funny is I've been pitched Bull Bitcoin US by a lot of people that want to bring Bull Bitcoin to the US. So, and a lot of people that I've been talking to are telling me, I don't know, how much of it is true, how much of it is posturing, but a lot of people seem to have connections with the Trump administration. And a lot of people seem to think that it's not just the strategic Bitcoin reserve that they're interested in. There is apparently an actual hands-off approach to Bitcoin at a regulatory level and at an enforcement level. Not to say that they're going to tolerate financial crime, obviously, or terrorist financing or anything like that. Not to say that they're going to remove KYC or anything, that we would like. But apparently, the mood has actually truly shifted in terms of enforcement. So who knows? I've got other stuff to deal with right now, but I used to say never the United States, and now I'm thinking, open mind.
Do you think you mentioned earlier that one of the problems you wanted to solve was this payments problem with Bitcoin, that it's not easy to make payments. We talk sometimes on the show about the nature of the messaging around Bitcoin from governments. Trump's administration is a great example of this. These guys are, as you mentioned, hands-off, or at least as hands-off as any government probably will be or has been to date. And part of me says that's really good, but then the other part of me says that these guys are pushing, either on purpose or just by coincidence, this store of value narrative that keeps everyone away from the payment side. It allows fiat to continue to rule the day there, while everyone else is sort of holding their Bitcoin in their basement and not using it, while Fink and the boys load up for the ETFs and the government loads up for the reserve and all this stuff. Is that a concern for you? Like when you say solving the payments problem, do you have that in the equation somewhere or no?
Yeah. So obviously, people want to get rich, right? And it's very hard to, let's say you look at establishment people, whether that's Michael Saylor, whether that's Larry Fink, or all of these Wall Street or Silicon Valley people. You can't push back against Bitcoin if it's costing all of these people an insane amount of opportunity cost. Imagine the US was to ban investing in Bitcoin. They would be, publicly hung probably, because you can't prevent people from making 1,000% gains over just a few years. That's just not feasible. So I think they've identified okay, people want to have exposure to the Bitcoin price, and we need to let that happen. So that's MicroStrategy went all in on that, and BlackRock went all in on that. And that's obviously not, I'm obviously not against number go up. That's number go up is something that makes Bitcoin more secure over the long term, because if the price of Bitcoin is higher, there's more economic activity, there's more hash rate. It becomes harder and harder to quote unquote take over Bitcoin, with a hostile start fork or something like that. So I'm not necessarily against number go up, both for philosophical reasons and for obvious personal reasons. I want to be more wealthy, very obviously. And it does make me cringe a little bit. You know what I mean? I don't like this. I'm not a fan of the strategic Bitcoin reserve personally. And I've been very consistent with that. I don't want the US government to own Bitcoin. I don't want the Canadian government to own Bitcoin, because I see them as being my enemies, right? So, if I look about which group of people and which institutions are causing me the most damage in my day-to-day life, just trying to live my life like I want, it's obviously the governments, So I don't want them to have more leverage over me than they already have. I believe Bitcoin is a tool for a sovereign individual, so I don't think it's a good idea to own MicroStrategy stock. when you could just as easily own Bitcoin in your own hardware wallet, and it's like not that hard. So that does make me cringe. But I don't really think that causes me harm as someone who wants to push Bitcoin for payments, unless it's some kind of a ploy to seem like they're Bitcoin friendly, to promote this like corporate NGU narrative, while at the same time they were cracking down on payments. Then I would be suspicious, but I don't think it's that much of a harm, and even if, it can be frightening to think that a bunch of ETFs and a bunch of governments own somewhere around like 3 million Bitcoins. I don't know what the number is, 2 to 3 million Bitcoins.
Yep.
Yeah, it's like very, very high. And there is a case to be made that, if all the Bitcoins are held by a bunch of small institutions, then they can theoretically take over the network. But it's much harder in practice than it is in theory. So I don't see it as a huge threat. And Bitcoin for payments is outside of the bubble of Twitter. It's huge. Like Bitcoin Jungle did 130,000 payments last year. Mm-hmm. Right? That's how many payments per day, Joey? Math. A lot.
It's a lot. Yeah, it's a lot of payments.
Saw Bitcoin payments. Bitcoin payments are happening in places that are, Venezuela. It's not a meme. Like, it's not a meme that Venezuelans are using Bitcoin. It's not like a LARP. There's a bunch of LARPs in Bitcoin that certain people or countries might be using Bitcoin. Venezuela is not a LARP. I know of human rights activists in Bolivia that have been using Bitcoin, in Togo that are using Bitcoin. Kenya has huge Bitcoin adoption. And another thing about Bitcoin is also like payments. It's not just coffee that you're spending. There's like legitimate commercial transactions are happening in Bitcoin. Real estate, there's definitely real estate transactions happening with Bitcoin. People are selling their businesses and selling them for Bitcoin. People are settling international import and export with Bitcoin. And I know this for a fact because some of them use Bold Bitcoin on one end of that commercial transactions. So, if you're a Canadian company and you're dealing with an exporter, you're an importer, and maybe there's something in another country that you need, and maybe somehow it's cheaper and faster to go through Bitcoin and then, maybe Tether or something than to go through the fiat banking system. That definitely happens. So I'm personally quite bullish on Bitcoin payments. I don't see the cringe SBR narrative as being an impediment. Although, I definitely prefer that Bitcoin culture stays to its cypherpunk sovereign individual roots. But the thing is, there definitely is a lot of cypherpunk Bitcoiners out there that are building tangible solutions for sovereignty and payments, even though the Michael Saylors, Larry Finks, and all that, they're on MSNBC, they're on TV, So I think they're like overrepresented in the media, and they're media darlings. Like, Bitcoin payments have a bad rap, obviously. NGU has a great rap because Michael Saylor's did a really good job at legitimizing NGU, and Bitcoin as sound money. Safety has done also a great job. Like, these guys have done a great job at convincing the establishment that we have a problem with central banking, and then Bitcoin's a great alternative. Payments have always been a little bit, the dark side of Bitcoin because of the Silk Road, because of, terrorist financing, which doesn't happen. Let's be frank, it just doesn't happen on Bitcoin. But, the Silk Road did happen, and there is definitely a lot of, drugs being sold and bought with Bitcoin and all sorts of nasty stuff. So that gets a bad rap, but I don't see that payments use case going away anytime soon.
Yeah, I think, if I think about people who have their own businesses, for example, much the same way as you're starting to see transactions on the real estate side or on the little payments side, soon people who have real skills are not going to accept currencies like the dollar, like the loonie for their services. I have a guy, news on air here. I have a guy coming to my house tomorrow to give me a quote on a bathroom reno. And I plan on asking the guy, like, I want to pay you at least half of this in Bitcoin, and it'll increase the value of the renovation for you and the value of the renovation that I'm willing to sort of, give my wealth to, but you got to find a way. And I think more people are going to start to see that because, as you mentioned, Bitcoiners are going to make up the bulk of the sort of wealth in most of these. I think in the developed nations for sure. I'm not, I can't speak on a lot of the countries you mentioned there, Costa Rica and others. But my guess is that in a country where there's not a ton of wealth to begin with, and the economy's, rather circular sort of by nature, the Bitcoin will rise to the top there even faster than it's going to here because the currency just isn't that strong. You're already talking about countries where, the dollar reigns supreme over whatever local currency is sort of, milling around or milling about in these banks. We should talk a bit about what's going on here in Canada. I don't know if you remember how to get here, if you needed me to point to you on a map or something, but we're in the middle of like a bit of a conundrum here, depending on who you ask. Trudeau obviously giving a almost teary-eyed speech the other day in front of a cottage. I don't know where that cottage is, somewhere in Ottawa probably. He's stepping down. I see guys like Carney, people like Freeland, trying to get in front of the media, trying to get in front of mics and cameras. And I wonder if you think it matters who leads us next, Pouliot, Freeland, Carney, whoever it ends up being. And I wonder if you think that there's a chance that, whoever takes the reins could turn around some of the, I think, objectively poor policy decisions the Trudeau government made, especially in the last 4 or 5 years. Do you think about Canadian politics at all these days or not really?
Yeah, I mean, I do. Obviously, I still follow Canadian political, shenanigans, and I follow Canadian media despite my best intention to stay away from it. I'm still Canadian, even though I left. Obviously, I'm very happy that Trudeau is stepping down. I'm happy that Pierre is going to be the next prime minister, unless the global cabal gets in the way somehow. I wouldn't put it past them. I wouldn't, if I have to put the odds, I don't think the odds are 95%. I think the odds are close
Me neither.
to 80%. So Pierre is obviously a Bitcoiner. How much of a Bitcoiner is he? That's the question. We've all seen him buy, a shawarma with Bitcoin. We've all seen him mention Bitcoin in passing once or twice, but he's not like a Bitcoin promoter. You know what I mean? There's like a 1 or 2 sound bites when he talks about Bitcoin. But I have it on good authority by different people that have different interactions with Pierre. Like at least 3 different people that he's generally he's generally more pro Bitcoin and anti Bitcoin. I don't think our data. So there's a lot of things that the Conservatives need to do. There's like energy policy. There's like healthcare. There's social security. There's immigration. There's housing. There's central bank policy. There's a lot of things on their plate that are like macro level stuff that they need to reverse that are going to have not a huge effect on us in the short term, like more in the long term. I don't think Bitcoin is a huge priority for them. The idea of a strategic Bitcoin reserve in Canada, it's just not going to happen. Are they going to roll? And the Trudeau government did actually, the KYC regulations on Bitcoin went into effect under the Trudeau government. There's a new regulation in place. Central Bank of Canada is getting a lot more power than it used to. It's kind of a long technical story, but Central Bank of Canada is asserting more power over payments technologies. There's a lot of stuff that they're just not going to be able to unravel because it's just been entrenched in the Ottawa swamp. And it's really easy to pass a regulation, but it's really hard to remove a regulation. You need a lot of like political capital and political will. So, imagine yourself into your new elected government. Like you need to focus all of your energy on unraveling policies that have been done for the last 10 years. I think energy is obviously going to be the most important one. And, like the size of the bureaucracy. So I don't think it's going to have a huge impact on Bitcoiners. It's not like, for example, if Maxime Bernier was to like get elected from one day to the next, or he's more of a Milei type, character. He's more like a Vivek Ramaswamy type character. Like Pouliot is more of a, kind of
he's a fence sitter a little bit, when it comes to some of these things. Yeah.
He's a big tent conservative and he wants to win elections. So I'm not, I don't see this at all as like a Trump win level stuff or Milei level stuff. But it's good to know that at least what's really heartwarming is that like a lot of young people are voting conservative, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that more than just Pouliot and like the Canadian Tories, being conservative is like becoming cool. Being base is becoming cool. Like being a vegan Antifa is like cringe for like a young TikToker. I mean, it's kind of like both. It's kind of like very polarized, but like definitely being you can just see it by like the kind of content on Instagram.
Totally.
Now you get hot chicks talking about raw milk and like about like having many babies is super dope. And it's like the counterculture. It's like it's pretty good. But nothing. The one policy, the one thing that I'm happy is like I can't wait. I don't know who is the minister responsible for Canada Post. I think it's like some really low level minister of like public services or whatever. I wish they would force Canada Post to turn the no KYC Bitcoin purchases back on, because that was obviously a political decision. That was a decision that came from, we don't know where, but it came from somewhere at the top. So that's my single voter issue is force Canada Post to sell Bitcoin for no KYC again.
Have you given any thought to expanding? I don't even know what else you could do with Bull Bitcoin, but I know, there was a time there where you guys were really under attack by the federal government, right? The no KYC thing was sort of the public facing element to that, but I'm sure there was more. Have you considered what it would look like to expand the services now that you have a friendly government for maybe 4 or 8 years? As you mentioned, even if you don't think that the next government will enjoy or embrace or support that level of service from you guys, it's hard to unravel things once they're entrenched. So have you thought about what it might look like over the next 4 or 8 years? Are you guys thinking, okay, we got 48 months here to give it as much shit as we can in Canada and try and get some new services out that are going to be impossible to get rid of?
I don't think so. As I said, like this, the Central Bank of Canada has basically given itself the authority to regulate payments companies. There's a new, and nobody knows about this. Like how, that's the crazy thing about politics. It's like, there's never been a vote. There's never been a political party talking about this thing called the RPAA, which I don't even know what the acronym means. But basically, like the Bank of Canada is, the bill's use case is, it's not in like jeopardy, but it might make our life harder, right? That we're doing third party bill payments with Bitcoin because of this new thing, which we're like negotiating and like kind of like, but that just came into effect. Like they're not going to unravel that. They're not going to lower the KYC thresholds or anything of that sort. So no. And part of the, if part of the logic also of Bull Bitcoin and spending in many other countries is, God forbid somehow Mark Carney becomes prime minister. And Mark Carney, by the way, is if you look on my Twitter feed and you search for Mark Carney, you're gonna see that like I'm somehow obsessed with the guy. Not a lot of people know who he is, other than he's some globalist. Everybody kind of knows he's a globalist, but he is the only person that I know that was the president of the Central Bank of Canada and of also England. Yeah. He was also on, I believe, the chairman, or definitely on the chair committee of the Bank of International Settlement, which is another three-letter organization that controls the world and that nobody knows about. Essentially, the Bank of International Settlement is the central bank of central banks. It is the ultimate boss. He was one of the architects of the Great Reset narrative. He's a climate hysteric. He's all for mandatory vaccines, like all the bad things. Mark Carney is somehow got his fucking finger in some organization that is pushing that. So if Carney had been elected prime minister, I think there would be a very, very real risk that a company like Bull Bitcoin would have been taken out. So part of the international expansion is like, all right, well, what happens if and they would never do it in a way which is overtly Marxist. They would do it in a very subtle way through grinding us down or putting pressure on our banking partners to kick us out. Thankfully, there are financial institutions in Canada that are based, and we're very, very fortunate to have found some people in Canada that are willing to go to the bat for Bull Bitcoin, which is great. And also we do a lot of volume, so it's good for them. And it's funny because so we moved from Quebec to Alberta a few years ago. We moved our head office, And technically speaking, every Bitcoin that we sell is like revenue. I know it's kind of weird. You'd think like, no, our commission is revenue, but like if I sell you one Bitcoin, like my company makes 150 grand in revenue. Like even though my profit margin is tiny. So like the amount of GDP that we increased to Alberta is fucking insane, because basically all of our transaction volume is now part of the Alberta GDP, which is really funny. So I think that like that doesn't go unnoticed. So being like, there's a really awesome quote from a book, Altered Carbon, which is like the establishment. You need to become a player. You need to become big for them to take you seriously. So the bigger we are, the bigger we are, the more protected we are, for sure. And yeah, so that's part of the reason, expanding in Europe, expanding in Latin America. If something happens in Canada, like we still have stuff to do. And I always have. I don't think bull Bitcoin is at direct risk of more regulatory scrutiny. I think like the services that people have now are definitely there to stay. Unfortunately, I thought the same thing about the no KYC at Canada Post. I actually thought that we were going to pull that off for many, many years. So and we sold a lot of Bitcoin.
I bet.
A lot. An amount that warms my heart when I go to bed at night to know that all these Bitcoins are in self-custody by some communities out there. And obviously, since we added KYC, like the volumes dropped by like 95%. Right? So it's gone, And to someday, I welcome the day where they shut down Bull Bitcoin Exchange with great relief, because as I mentioned earlier in the call, it's really a pain in the ass to run a Bitcoin exchange. It's not a fun job. And if someone is thinking about launching a Bitcoin exchange, I would say don't. And if you do, you're going to be very, very tempted to sell out your principles really quick, because sticking to your principles, running a Bitcoin exchange or regulated financial institution is really, really difficult. You were there. I had this talk in Montreal about like the hard path, and like taking the hard path is important. The hard path is actually quite hard. But I'm fortunate enough to be like in a position in my life where if something went wrong with Bull Bitcoin, I would just double down on the wallet like super, super hard, even as I get like older, I'm thinking about like this quote by Aaron Schwartz, which I posted today on Twitter. I think
Great. I saw that. Great quote.
Yeah, which is like, what's the most important thing you could be working on in the world right now? And if you're not doing that, like, why aren't you? And I often think about like, what's the legacy that I'm going to live on this earth? Other than my kids and my family and my friends and all that. Like, what's my legacy as a member of our civilization, as a member of the human race generally. And something that I kind of realized is open source software is immortal. It never goes away. Like a Bitcoin exchange service is temporary. Bitcoin open source software is immortal. So if anything ever happened to Bull Bitcoin, I would just double down on the open source software. And as I said, it's like it's my main passion is collaborating on these tools and on these technologies. And even now I kind of fell into the rabbit hole of Nostr, and I'm really Nostr was. It's just definitely tempting to see Nostr as kind of like a novelty, like Blue Sky or like Truth Social or like another place where you can, shitpost. But the more I interact with Nostr and I talk to Nostr developers and I talk to, like I've had the chance to discuss with quite a good number of pretty hardcore human rights activists and people who are like repressed, like actually repressed, whether they are in Syria, Iran, or Bolivia or Venezuela, almost always fighting against a communist dictatorship somewhere in the world. I'm really seeing like the liberating power and the insanity of freedom that Nostr brings. So like I'm very bullish on individual freedom and sovereignty. I think not only we have the cultural movement behind us, we've got Trump being kind of an avatar, like a caricature of like the based freedom movement, even though we all know that he might not believe, but
big tent, like you said.
Yeah, but he is at least talking about those topics. So very bullish on that. I don't believe in the black pill at all, to be honest. The more I'm in Bitcoin, the less cynical I become about Bitcoin. I've had phases of cynicism, and you talk about SBR. MicroStrategy, Wasabi collapsed, Samurai guys went to jail. Is it over for Bitcoin privacy? No, there's definitely a lot of stuff being worked on. So I'm very, very positive about that.
As the space grows, as the asset gains traction, we will get more minds looking at this thing than we ever had before. And if our biggest problems are, if we're able to overcome them through software development and through the focused efforts of a few people, as the quote goes, we will overcome. It's hard sometimes. I mean, the black pill thing is something we sort of tango with on the show quite a bit, because it's easy to get lost in just the complete insanity, whether it's Toronto raising property taxes another 7% so you can die in an ER hallway, or a lesbian firefighter telling you that your husband's too big for her to carry out and it's his fault, while the city burns or the state burns, basically, at this point. It's easy to get carried away in the black pill stuff. But, you mentioned something there, and it's a thread I want to pull on, because I know you have, I think, 1 or 2 kids, and I just had my first kid. And I think about now more and more this idea of the hard path and what it means to leave a legacy and what it means to raise a little one in a world where you mentioned the culture is shifting a bit, but I think broadly, say some of the things that you and I in public is like difficult. You are inviting looks, you are inviting conflict, you are inviting meetings with the principal, you are inviting any number of things. And it's funny, my wife and I joke about this all the time, that the likelihood that I spend more time in the principal's office as a parent than I did as a student is basically 100%. I would guess that's the case for a lot of Bitcoiners. So I'll ask you straight up, maybe to start the conversation about this stuff. How do you think about being a sort of Bitcoin father, a legacy father, someone who's got to push against the grain, who's made a living really pushing against the grain?
When I was still living in Canada during the lockdown, I got not arrested, but I got in a pretty heated confrontation with the cops over the lockdowns. I started to really think, like, if I have a kid here, they're going to take my kid away. Yeah. Crazy story, also a true story. There's a guy that contacted me on Twitter during the lockdown that had his kid taken away because I can't remember exactly the story, but he was talking about Russia, and he was talking about contact tracing, and obviously he was
talking about it where, online, you mean?
No, with his kids.
Oh, okay.
With his kids, and then the kids told the mom, and they were separated, and then the school got involved, and then the kids were talking about contact tracing and globalism and conspiracy stuff, but the same kind of conspiracy stuff that I talk about and that I would talk about to my kids, and like, Dad, why don't we have the QR code? Well, because the QR code is a way for the government to control you, and I wouldn't lie to my kids, and this guy contacted me because he was like, dude, I need to talk to you. I need your help. I need to talk about this with someone. Like, what do I do? Like, I'm freaking out, blah, blah, blah. And obviously was in a state of a state of distress, and I was trying to make sure that he doesn't do something retarded, and he plays the game as much as possible, repent. He had to go through counseling, and he had to do all sorts of shit, and I'm like, just fucking go, pretend you are reformed and you no longer believe in all that shit. Your kids is, and like in my case, of course, it's tricky because I'm there's also a great quote. Madex has this on a bunch of his paintings about the man that only wants to be left alone, and the man that really wants to be left alone, he's willing to take a lot of crap because he knows that the day he starts to fight back, they're going to come after him, and he might lose his family. So, but the day that the man who just wants to be left alone is forced to fight back and knows that in essence his life is destroyed because he might go to jail, or he might become political dissidents that I've met just a couple last weeks ago. They're on the run, from their governments because they were advocating for free markets, free speech, and freedom of association, and they don't see their families anymore. Their former lives is effectively destroyed, and their families are effectively destroyed. So it's tough to balance your willingness to die on the hill and your willingness to to be a good dad. Fortunately, I think I've been a big fan of like the sovereign individual thesis and like creating tools and systems for my particular life, which allowed me to retain my sovereignty and to become mobile. So I think I've done a pretty good job at for preparing for living in a world of tyranny. And having a kid it's really something, because even before I had a kid, I knew somehow, I knew in advance that I wanted to have kids. So it's not like I just had a kid and then my entire belief system changed. I always thought about having kids. I think about my ancestors all the time. I think about myself being part of a long legacy of very badass individuals, and I want that legacy to continue for a really long time. But you don't have a choice but to be optimistic when you have kids. Like you can't be blackpilled, because like your kids, you want to be optimistic. Like you want to create something better for your kids. You want to you see, my kid is like a year and a half now, and it's all smiles. She's not a newborn anymore. She's like, she loves the world. The world is amazing. The world is fantastic. And I definitely want to create like a better world. And I can't just be blackpilled and be like, BlackRock won and it's fucking over, and let's go live on a farm somewhere in the middle of nowhere. No, like, and I've been having this conversation with a lot of Bitcoiners, and having a kid is one thing I'll say. It's great for business. It's great for business. It's not if you're an entrepreneur, it's not a bad thing to have a kid. Actually, it's way better, because when you have a kid, you become ruthless in business, and you become a lot more shrewd and a lot more, let's say, efficient with your time, efficient with your money. Everything that you spend is legacy that's being taken away from your kid. And it's like, I know, if I buy something, or if Bull Bitcoin makes the wrong investment, I'm going to, it's going to be worth like 10x more in the next few years, and that really stinks. But when you think about like, oh fuck, that's going to be worth 10,000x more, and I just literally spent an entire private island that my child could have owned, and it's a very good experience. Another thing also that I've learned is that it's never the right time to have a kid. It's never the wrong time to have a kid. People are like overthinking about like planning and stuff like that, and like consistently what I've seen is like people who have kids, they will fucking make the money. Like look, I can't. That's good. Kids are expensive. They're not. Well, it's true, but they're actually not that expensive. Like you can, you can have a very.
You have to pay it all up front. Everyone talks about it's $500,000 to raise a kid. It's not $500,000 the day they're born.
Yeah,
you have 25 years to pay that out.
yeah, and yeah, of course, having a kid is a natural course of it's the natural thing for a Bitcoiner to do, because the possibilities that Bitcoin will have in a far future are something that we will never get to experience. Like we will never get to experience what it's like to have like tens of billions of dollars worth of purchasing power, and being able to affect like insanely massive change in the world without requiring outside funding. And honestly, a lot of people are like, oh, but you don't want to spoil your kids. I mean, we're not talking about spoiling your kids, but like I know what it's like to be able to do, because I'm an early Bitcoin adopter. So, I had Bitcoin from a while back. Like the ability to be an entrepreneur and not depend on external funding allows you to do things that you otherwise could never do. Taking that hard path that I'm talking about, it's very hard to do when you're getting VC funding. This is a recurrent conversation that I have with a bunch of people, a bunch of other Bitcoin entrepreneurs, which are, technically they might be competitors of Bull Bitcoin, or we might become their competitors in the future. And, we talk about, oh, it's so cool what you guys are doing at Bull Bitcoin. Like, I really wish that I could, do that. But, I gotta, have investors, we gotta work on the shitcoins, man. Like, we don't have a choice, shitcoin pays the rent. Like, we got to go into this CBDC or this Tether stuff, or we can't afford to work on self-custody. I wish I could be self-custodial, but then I would lose ROI and that kind of stuff. And this is because they have investors, and which is totally normal. It's capitalist society. So, you want to have investors, but the ability to be self-financed and what are my kids going to be able to do with that money in the future? And now also when you're leaving, when you plan on leaving Bitcoins to your kids, even though it might not be like an insane amount of wealth today, you know, whether it's like, you know, a couple of Bitcoins or maybe a little more than a Bitcoin, or maybe a little less than a Bitcoin. But, you know, we can imagine Bitcoin's going to be, you know, I always say 10 million bucks, you know, worth, you know, at some point. Then it becomes very, very important for you to create a family culture and like to raise your kids properly so that they understand, you know, like, you know, when you will be older, you will have responsibility. You will have the responsibility of the wealth that you inherit. And after we're dead, you know, we're going to be able to control what they do with the money. So we need for them to be prepared and to raise them right. So I'm a big advocate for having kids. And whenever I meet like, you know, young-ish entrepreneurs that are kind of like crushing it in like the startup scene and they don't want to have kids because they think it's going to be bad for their business, I'm like, you have no idea the motivation you'll get when you have a kid, and like you have no idea the innate desire of like domination and conquest that you have when you get a kid. It's great. Yeah.
It's been one of the most eye-opening experiences in my life for sure. And one of the things I think about often is the sort of villainization of, I don't want to call them, you know, the trust fund baby, but the kid who's got a successful lineage, right? And, you know, I look at the way that successful lineages are represented and sort of demonized in the media. And I see the same thing all the time. I see a kid who had his university tuition paid for, or her university tuition paid for, right? This is sort of I think this sort of middle standard for something like this. And people in the press, people on Twitter, people who are not part of successful lineages will say the same thing all the time. This was handed to you and it's an unfair advantage. It's an unfair advantage. And that line of thinking translates to stuff like inheritance taxes that are 100%, translates to stuff like you shouldn't be able to stay in the house that you bought once you don't need every single room for your kids or whatever. You shouldn't be able to have a car that you didn't pay for or whatever, right? All these things. And, you know, the consequences of punishing and villainizing that kind of good decision-making over generations is cancerous to a society. Because what you're really doing there is punishing the kind of dynastic thinking that we're talking about, this kind of urge to conquer and destroy and accumulate and grow and succeed, not just for you, not just for your wife, but for someone you're never going to meet. It's, you know, planting the seed for a tree whose shade you will never enjoy. And that's the only thing that separates us from the apes, man, you know? And when I see this kind of stuff, I think about my daughter, I think about my wife, and it's almost like an out-of-body experience. For people who haven't had a kid, if you want to have a true out-of-body experience, go to a delivery room, go to a birthing center with your wife, a woman you love, and watch the birth of your child. There's nothing like it. The way that your mind operates in that moment is incredible. I'm not a nervous guy at all. I'm pretty sure I blacked out for like 7 or 8 minutes. Before you know it, you're cutting the cord, they're weighing your baby, you know, the baby's on your chest. And all of a sudden, all the stuff you cared about a day ago, 2 days ago, and all the stuff you thought you were going to care about when the baby was born, it's gone. And you don't understand all the things. It's like in that moment is the only time you understand all the things your parents did for you, the sacrifices they were willing to make, the things they were willing to give up. You know, I don't talk about this at all on the show, but I'll mention it. My parents are divorced, and it wasn't a pretty divorce. And, you know, talking to them now, the only reason they stayed together, they sacrificed what would have probably been great years for both of them apart. They sacrificed it for my brother and I. And like, you could never imagine making that kind of sacrifice until you have a kid. And to that end, it's not just about what you sacrifice for the kid. It's what you're saying too. It's, you don't know the lengths and the greatness of which you are capable as a human until there's this kid in your life. Yeah. And that is something that you cannot replicate. You cannot get that anywhere else, nowhere else that's available to you as a human.
Yeah. And one thing that you said about the cancer of inherited wealth and unfairness of it.
You know, generational thinking is prosecuted by people whose lineage was not as successful as yours or mine or anyone's.
that's like late stage fiat thinking. I recommend two very good books. One of them is Taipan and Noble House by James Clavell. So the same guy who wrote Shogun. So a lot of people know Shogun from the Netflix series. But it talks about a dynasty of merchants from England that basically created Hong Kong. And the guy, the protagonist of the first book, who through sheer, how to say that, just power of personality and ambition and wit and wisdom and strength, basically creates Hong Kong. And his family becomes a dynastic merchant family in Hong Kong until the late 80s, so you kind of like go through that journey, and his family, he passes down an insane amount of gold, of wealth from generation to generation. And very interesting also, I had this discussion with Bitcoiners years ago, and when I read that book, I was like, wow, this is exactly what we were talking about. So he creates a constitution for the family, almost like a state, right? When you become the new head of the family, you have to swear like a blood oath to respect the original constitution and the vision of the company. The company and the family are one and the same, can never be diluted, and you can never break this oath, So it's really dope. The other one is a book called When the Lion Feeds. I forget the name of the author. Just finished reading it. That's also a dynasty of, again, British in South Africa, basically building a mining and financial empire in South Africa, which follows the origin story of these settlers, like, I don't know, 17th century or 18th century, all the way up to apartheid. And so these are obviously fictional stories, but, if you look at the history of Rome, the history of, the Medici, why do we have the greatest beauty and human achievement in Florence, in Italy, from the Renaissance? It's because these dynastic families wanted to leave a legacy for themselves and for their descendants. They wanted to create, like all the paintings of Botticelli and like Michelangelo. It looks like it's just random people in, random characters, but it's actually the models are actually like his daughters, his sons, and all of that. And, if you think about, the creation of a cathedral, which you will never see the completion of because it takes 100 years. And then a great series of novel called The Pillars of the Earth. It's following the building of a cathedral in England, which takes 100 years, and it's like the character, and like he's training his son to continue working on the cathedral after his death, and it's only the grandson that gets to see the finished cathedral. It's like this long-term thinking is why we have great things. It's why we have amazing things. And the people who think that inheriting wealth is unfair they are destroyers, and they're looters. And there is no worse tax in the world. There's no greater evil than inheritance tax. And the crazy thing about inheritance tax is, like, I have also like, personal, I'm not going to name, but like, there are personal stories with inheritance tax. But imagine a young person whose grandparents died, whose parents die, and they inherit, let's say they inherit like a big building, and they inherit a bunch of physical assets, and then the income tax on that is 65%.
Yeah,
and then
what do you do?
You have to sell it. You have to sell your parents' estates. You have to sell your parents' stuff, and then you have 35% left, but also the lawyers and legal fees and everything that has to do with paying those taxes. You end up with like 25% of, and then you're left all alone. Like, that inheritance tax is possibly the most evil thing you can do. It incentivizes people to throw away their wealth and consume all the way to the end. I've seen both. I've seen families whose where the parents are very conservative about their wealth because they are very pro inheritance, and I've seen other families close up where the parents are like, I'm gonna fucking burn everything, before I die. And yeah, obviously the greater family culture and the greater outcomes, I think, are parents that are pro inheritance. And that's another thing also, which as a Bitcoiner, is interesting. Before I had a kid, I was thinking like, so what am I going to do with what happens to the Bitcoins after I die? Like my parents are like well off, so I can give them the Bitcoin, but they don't need Bitcoin. They don't. Not going to dox my parents, but they're fine. They're fine. They're living their life, and they don't need that. I have a brother. He could get some Bitcoin, but if you don't have any kids, like what am I going to do with all those Bitcoins? And that leads you also to like take care of your securing your private keys becomes a lot easier when you don't have kids. When you have kids, it becomes a lot harder to secure private keys because then you have to add the trade-off of my that's a whole other rabbit hole, but it's easy to secure private keys if you don't need to pass them on after you die. Once you have to handle a transition, like an estate planning transition for your private keys, it becomes a lot harder. So that's the final problem with self-custody that I want to fix. I want to fix inheritance, and I want to fix inheritance in a way which achieves what I want to achieve, which is that I want. I haven't seriously spent weeks and months focusing on this idea because I have other shit to do. But I know that somehow I want the Bitcoins to be released programmatically over a long period of time. Certain amounts of Bitcoin accessible right away, but definitely a long tail of Bitcoins that are released over time. I think about it also like Bitcoins that may not be accessible for 100 years. That way I can guarantee that my kids will not inherit those Bitcoins. I don't want these Bitcoins are for your grandkids, right? And if you die, then nobody's going to get them. If you die without kids, nobody's going to get them, right? And I also want to have a method and a culture and a system and a ritual and some kind of thing where the keys are passed down from generation to generation for an extended period of time. And that also idea is linked to this book, like Taipan and Noble House, where, this founder creates this foundation for the family. And there's this kind of cult, almost around the founder and his vision for the dynasty that we have to respect and that we have to pass on. And I believe that we are on the cusp of achieving this from a technological perspective, something that we've never been able to do before, because if, throughout human history, you're lucky if you're able to pass on your wealth to your kids. There's all sorts of things that can happen during inheritance, whether it gets seized, taxed, robbed or something like that. Like just like a logistical, practical aspect of wealth transfer to the next generation. It's really hard. Forget even inflation, just physical security of the assets being transferred. Planning for 3 or 2 generations down the line, that is, kind of ridiculous. Just focus on giving it to your kids. And if that's good enough, that's fine. But imagine if we can secure wealth that is locked for multiple generations, 100 years, 150 years. What is that going to have as an effect on, your family, your dynasty, on the world? I wonder.
It's not hard to conceptualize it. I think as you're talking there, I'm kind of picturing the Mandelbrot, I can't remember what it is, the repeating sort of mathematical pattern, right? So as you kind of drill down into what looks like a leaf pattern, there's another leaf pattern. And the thing I think when I think about that is, it looks small now at year 2025, but as you drill down to 2050, it's going to be greater. The power is going to be greater. The growth that the family is going to see is going to be more significant. And the decision making, you have 50 more years of information, 50 more years of compounding good decisions, 50 more years of adherence to the contract, adherence to the bloodline, adherence to the company code, all these things. And there's just no reward right now for a lot of families who want to do this, because as you mentioned, there's just this perverse tax. And by the way, I'm not necessarily anti every tax. In a small community, you would be expected to give some of your wealth or your time or whatever to maintain services, and that's fine. My big beef is that at scale, what we're seeing is this perverted theft and just this money goes to all the worst causes. There's nothing productive about the outcomes. There's nothing productive about the people taking the money from you. And it stings so much more. And worse, when you see these companies or you see these guys like Warren Buffett, who's a quote unquote philanthropist, the same companies who villainize dynastic thinking, these guys are also running these pseudo philanthropic outfits. They'll take your money. They're not going to give that money to someone else. That money is for them, their foundation, their family, their company, whatever. The same things they tell you not to do, they are doing at a level that was unimaginable only 100 years ago. These guys are experts at wealth preservation. They're experts in dynasty, and they're experts in making sure that you never join the club. And Bitcoin ends that, and it can end it in a generation or two from today. And I think that scares a lot of people.
Amen, man. Amen. And, I'm also currently reading the biography of Cicero, reading about the Roman Empire and about, the Roman, there was not a lot of tax in Rome, like pretty much everything was built by dynastic families, that for the purpose of achieving immortal glory. And as kind of like crazy as it sounds, like that is, that seems to have been the driving factor for public service in ancient Rome, other than corruption. But you would, but you would have the Colosseum, like these colonnades, these amphitheaters, like aqueducts. A lot of these posts, by the way, like to be responsible for managing the aqueducts of Rome was a post that you had to pay for, that you were not paid for. You had to pay for the privilege of being the guy who manages the city's garbage, because that gave you prestige. And that gave you a chance of achieving higher posts and maybe becoming a general one day and maybe becoming a consul. And once you become a consul, then it becomes illegal for your statue to be erected in the cities of Rome. And then your family becomes immortalized and your family name, and then your kids. And then once you become a consul and once you have your fucking statue in the street, it becomes way easier for your kids to become consuls and all of that, And it's so funny also. Who will build the roads? I will build the roads, by the way. I love building roads. One of the guys who orange pilled me, who's like my Bitcoin mentor. So obviously he's more OG than me. Taught me a lot about Bitcoin. He builds roads. So he lives also in a developing country, and he physically builds infrastructure. That's his new thing. He loves it. He bought a fleet of bulldozers and excavators, and he's building roads for free. In the jungle, because he wants to get to point A to point B faster, and he's building them. We were just talking about that today, to be like this specific road that he's building to go to the beach faster. And I'm like, what are we gonna do? Like, are you gonna have like a gate? And then how are we gonna open the gate? And like, maybe we just charge a Bitcoin payment to open the gate. So there's like a selection in order to go through this road. Like, it's not gonna be a lot, but you have to be a Bitcoiner. And, a lot of Bitcoiners that I know are into a lot of, like me personally, like what do I want to do with my wealth? Like if I had to spend the money, like what would I spend it on? I think I would most definitely buy a fucking lot of jungle. I love the jungle. Like, obviously, as you can tell, I'm a big fan of the jungle. I like the chaos, the anarchy, the beauty, the danger. There's just something about the jungle that I just derive, and I'm not that much of a hippie, although, I live in a hippie place, but I do derive some kind of energy. I'm a Christian, I'm not a pagan, but still, I do derive some kind of energy from the jungle. And like, what better legacy than to buy fucking 10,000 acres of jungle and to prevent it from being ever destroyed, like to conserve it. Like, these are living monuments to my glory, and like and that's the thing that the commies don't see. Like, when you get the state to do a national park, there will never be a national park. That's not true. In the south of Costa Rica, actually, where I used to live in Santa Teresa, there's this gigantic, awesome national park, which was literally founded by these Swedish rich people, like in the 60s, if we have more wealth, like, we will do that. What is more baller, having a Lamborghini or having Jaguars? Jaguars are way cooler. Like, I have Jaguars on my land. What do you have? Fuck you, man.
I think there's something to this idea of like, you mentioned it there with the jungle and preserving it. It's beautiful. It's this living thing. The one thing I think about sometimes with my daughter, and having a kid is a good example of this. And, I'll preface this with this idea that you can teach a kid, like an infant, perfect pitch. And perfect pitch is something a lot of people think they have, but they don't actually have. This ability to name a note when you hear it without comparing it in your mind. The same way that you and me can look at the background of the podcast and say, that's red. I don't need to know that it's not blue or not green. I just know that it's red. It's only possible through a certain kind of like classic jazz, or some John Coltrane songs will have it, or Miles Davis songs will have it. This idea of intentional entropy to force adaptation. And it's something that you don't see a lot of now, but kids do it. You're kind of talking about it, and you see this in the jungle. Like, I want to preserve this. This is beautiful chaos. There's something here that can't be replicated, should not be destroyed, and we should not give this up under any circumstances. And if it's the Francis Pouliot jungle, even better. If it's a jungle in which a friend of mine built some roads with a fleet of excavators, even better. And it's something Bitcoiners don't like. We're taking entropy, I think, out of our lives in a lot of ways in Bitcoin, but there is room for forced adaptation through intentional moments of randomness and chaos, and that's something we can't forget. Do you want to cover anything else? We can leave it there. What do you think?
I don't know, man. We've definitely talked a lot. We talked about Canada. We talked about bull Bitcoin. Shield my stuff. Shield my app. No, man. I'm pretty satisfied. I just had a big team meeting with the whole team, and just this whole conversation we had about the black pill, the white pill, and we need to remain uncorrupted, and we need to remain very optimistic and very hopeful. And the last thing I'd say, it's like, there's a lot of FUD coming from within the Bitcoin community. Some of the guys at Bitcoin magazines, everybody's like, Tether's controlling everything, BlackRock's controlling everything. Bitcoin has been co-opted, whether that's coming from Roger Ver. It recently came from Amir Taki, which was an early, Bitcoin developer, coming from, all due respect, Shinobi and all those kinds of guys.
I have Mark Goodwin's book is behind me here. He's another guy who's
Mark Goodwin, and like, Whitney Webb, like professional black pillars. And I like the guys also because I like them because they're trying to shift the Overton window on the other side away from the cringe, right? So they're being like extremely, and like they're trying to paint a dark picture because everyone is dick sucking euphoria around Michael Saylor and all of that. So they're trying to create like the opposite camp, for people to come like in the middle ground. So I kind of respect that. But I am extremely optimistic, and not about the Bitcoin price, which I am, but about our ability to become sovereign individuals, and our ability to take back our freedom and liberty. And I think that our civilization came to a fork in the last 10 years, where there's two paths where it could have gone, and COVID is kind of like the catharsis of this path, where we are either going to this totalitarian dystopia, where we are living in the pods, and where we are it's essentially just like a gigantic hive at some point that's ruled by an oligarchy, in which we are completely unable to extricate ourselves in the future, right? Because there is a path also where, if the tyranny becomes so severe and so hard that like 1984, right, is the best example of that. And then there's the other path, which is the liberate. Hal Finney has this great quote, which is like the computer can liberate mankind instead of oppress it. So we're kind of like at this fork in the road now, where on one side you have Bitcoin, you have Nostr, you have peer-to-peer distributed system, you have radical decentralization, so like homesteading, small families, tribal mentality coming back, return to the roots, and on the other side, you have globalism, fiat, oppression, big state. And by the way, like X is not a victory. Like Elon buying X it's just a different shade of, Elon is just like pure Pouliot, it's like, yeah, it's good that it's like, I'd rather have like a little less censorship of my friends on X than, I'd rather have like a guy in power that is like more based than the guy who's not based. Like that's obviously a net win, for sure. But you have this totalitarian, loosely held conspiracy of patricians, essentially, that believe that they can micromanage the entire universe, and that we are all living in their simulation, and perhaps we're not even real in their minds. Perhaps they are actually the only person that's a real person in there. I think a lot of these people are like sociopathic. Like they actually might consider realistically, like, I might actually be the only person in the world, and maybe everyone around me is like fake, and this is my simulation. A lot of people think that this like is a cool thing about Elon, that he might actually think, it's his simulation. No, fuck you, man. I fucking exist, like I'm not in your fucking simulation. I'm not an fucking NPC. So we're like at this fork, and it's like, it could go either way, right? It could go either way. If Bitcoin had not existed, we definitely, the fork would have gone in one direction, right? So Bitcoin is like the rock solid foundation of the resistance of everything else. Everything else, because Bitcoin is without private property, without freedom of commerce, and the ability to express your exit, financially. By being able to move your wealth and like to protect your wealth. Without that as like a rock solid foundation, we are essentially all slaves. We are all slaves, or most of us are slaves. Some of us are slightly or radically less enslaved than others. I like to think that I'm less enslaved than most people, but I still have to show my fucking passport. I still have to show my little fucking driver's license if I want to take my car on my road. I still have to have the permission slip, from Daddy JD, or from whatever authority. So some of us are a bit less enslaved than the others, but we're still slaves, to some degree. But without Bitcoin, we'd be absolute slaves. So it's normal that people are like concerned and worried that, because we could go either way, and I get that, and like, but I think, however, I think that we even though we could go either way, I think like the work that we're doing, and by we, I mean like the great we of the Nostr and Bitcoin and cypherpunk, kind of like freedom fighting individuals. And it doesn't take a lot of us, by the way. And that's another thing that's important, that if there was like the cypherpunk toxic maximalist political party, we would get the same amount of votes that the PPC does, which is like 2%, and we would lose and we would be fucked. But this is not how it works, right? A radically motivated and skilled minority of individuals with tight bonds. And another thing is also like the Bitcoin tribe and the Nostr tribe, and like that whole thing, which is like loosely held group, like a loosely held tribe, and we have our own culture and our own language and our institutions and rituals, which is very vague, but also it's very tangible. And it's tangible for other people than others. Like for me, it's very tangible because, I interact with other Bitcoin builders from all over the world. And like, I can see that there's a very strong, like, gravitational force around us, where it only takes a small amount of us to say no, right? We don't need the majority of people, right? So that's why people are kind of like Blackbit, because you're still thinking about democracy. And you're like, oh, at least 50% of people are retarded, and it's fine. It's okay to be retarded, man. It's like it's like the average IQ is 100. That means that half of the people are under 100 IQ. Like it's fine, and like, not everybody, it's don't despair because everyone around you is like retarded. We only despair about that because the way that it works currently, is that these people vote, and then the politicians have dominion over our lives, and we're fucked. It's mob rule. Effectively, we're living it under mob rule, and in order to convince the majority of people to leave you alone is just never going to happen, right? The majority of people are always going to want to take your stuff. They're always going to want to, just literally just take your stuff and put you down. But these technologies and these systems and these processes and these structures that we're building are resistant to mob rule. So even though we may feel like we are alone, it only takes a small amount of us. And like just the gravitational pull of Bitcoin, it's so hilarious. There's this guy who's an internet legend. He's been working on decentralized protocols for quite a bit. I'm not going to name him, but he's a really famous guy. And he's got like purple hair, and he's Berkeley, San Francisco, California, Antifa type guy. And I was chatting with him, and he was like, aesthetically and culturally, like I associate more with Ethereum, but it's like, but Bitcoin is just that it's the one that works, is the one that's actually decentralized. And it's like, he's almost like a Bitcoiner. Despite himself, he's a Bitcoin maxi, even though he identifies aesthetically with Ethereum more. And, with Ethereum's like the social justice side of,
100%.
You have crypto, but the pole of Bitcoin as like a true activist, like as a true revolutionary, is so strong that we're able to pull this guy and bring him on our side. And also, I think a few of these guys, I met another dude actually who worked at Truth Social. So he was an engineer who works at Truth Social, but he's not based. Actually, he's like super not based. He's like the opposite of based. And then I know it's very ironic, but he's like the total other side. Even though he's like an engineer at Truth Social, and like and now he's working on Bitcoin and Nostr. He works on Bitcoin and Nostr, and he actually contributes to create tools that we're going to be using. So we have like, and it's like, it's not like Bitcoin is an open tent that is welcoming everyone, which it is, but not actively. We're not seeking out these individuals, but like Bitcoin is like the gravity well of revolutionaries. And then we have this common thing that keeps us together, both ideologically and both financially and structurally and institutionally. Like we all speak the kind of like same language of Bitcoin, and we're able to collaborate using Bitcoin as the medium of collaboration. So and that's also why Nostr couldn't have existed, I think, without Bitcoin, right? No. So and there's a reason why Nostr was seeded originally with Bitcoiners, and there's a reason, I think, why like Blue Sky and all these other non alternative decentralized social networks are not emerging, is because it was seeded with Bitcoin, and Bitcoin, like the Bitcoin culture, became the culture of Nostr. And no matter how, and there's like the foundational principles of like self-sovereignty and privacy and decentralization and censorship resistance that are core to Bitcoin. And this idea of like uncompromise, on these principles, that is now part of Nostr. Like that's why Nostr is so solid, So very, very long way to say that I'm super bullish and super optimistic. I've never been so optimistic. Bitcoin is so good. Like, on a privacy level, also there's tons of stuff. There's, I think the biggest like black bill of the last year was like Samurai getting arrested. That was a huge black bill for a lot of people. And then Wasabi just imploding from the inside and just collapsing, which is really sad. I had a lot of beef with Samurai, very well publicized, personal enmity to Samurai. Because to be fair, like, T-Dev is a fucking psycho, and like the founder and leader of Samurai, even though obviously he's a great man, like he's a great man, he's a great person, but funnily enough, I actually, after they got arrested, like I, kind of like became friends with a lot of the Samurai guys.
Because the language of Bitcoin, the language of Bitcoin is ideological, and whether you agree with someone technically or on the fringes, the ideological slant, the ideological bent of Bitcoiners is the same. And getting arrested will calcify that bead for you in a way that not many other things will.
Yeah, well, I think there is no greater motivation for a Bitcoin builder to be arrested or to have your friends arrested. More on that topic on another time. But it is actually a very real threat, and it's not talked about enough. Like there's definitely personal security risk for a lot of Bitcoiners. Not for the average person, but like for people who are building payments related things. There's definitely concerns, but yeah, so these were like huge black pills, and obviously like MicroStrategy now has 500,000 Bitcoin. How the fuck did that happen? And obviously they are not friends of our ideology. Although I don't think they might not be enemies, right? I don't have opinions on Saylor.
They're an unknown quantity. Mike Saylor is an unknown quantity. So is MicroStrategy. Anyone who says otherwise is not being honest with themselves.
I've never met the guy. I've never talked to him. Not invited to the party, by the way. So I cannot judge. I have very little opinion on that topic. But yeah, I mean. And just another thing, so my dad, he's like part of a golf club, and all of his friends are, like not turbo normies, but like normie entrepreneurs, right? So like, like probably like a little conservative leaning, but just like, and then now the big thing is so funny. It's like BlackRock is taking over Bitcoin. Like, what do you think about BlackRock taking over? And I read in the newspaper that BlackRock is going to change Bitcoin, and maybe they're going to double the size of Bitcoin and something like that. And like, secretly, I think, if like, imagine if Coinbase loses the keys of BlackRock and MicroStrategy, and then like they think they're going to be able to revert that or to like unlock those Bitcoins, and they're going to be doing my battery's almost dead, bro. Almost dead. I'm going to try to plug it in. Okay, hold on. It's almost gone.
So this is good content.
Shit.
Just dropped off. Okay, we'll give him a minute. It's funny. We talk about Saylor a lot on this show, and I don't know where I come down on the guy. Having a pizza party for 100, 150 of your closest friends, and inviting, I think, a lot of what what some people online would say are PodConf approved podcasters, media outlets, all these things. There he is. He's back now.
I'm back. Yeah. And like, so, but unfortunately for some reason, is this gonna, I don't know what this is gonna do.
You're the only guy I know who does podcasts without his stuff plugged in. There he goes. He left again. Francis is the most technologically savvy guy we have on the show from a Bitcoin side, but doesn't plug his laptop in. So make of that what you will. A savant. We'll give him a second here. Because I just want to get the usual stuff, right? It's fair to say Francis should get the closing comment here. Here we
critical
go.
Level.
He's back. He made
battery critical level. It's gonna die. Okay. But anyway, I am not PodConf approved, by the way. I'm gonna try to say not PodConf approved. But yeah, my general message again. White pills only, no more black pills. Joey, I don't know if you can hear me, but my screen just went dark. So
I can hear you. Good night.
It's good night for me.
God
Thanks
bless
so much
you
for having me, man.
My pleasure. Take care, everyone. We'll see you next time.
All right. Take it easy, guys.